quite a while. I think it's almost maybe a month since we were here, because last week I was not feeling well, but I'm feeling much better now. Grateful for that. Dad, what's a record player? It's a typical question received by parents quite a bit during their children's younger years of development. And this one came from the back seat of the car as we drove home from the feast about 10 years ago. My son's interest was undoubtedly piqued when he heard about something that he'd never heard of before, something new, and naturally he wanted to know what it was. And it's a seemingly simple question, but not necessarily a simple question to answer, especially to a young child, especially when you consider our child's first experience with a movie on VHS, when he asked if it was loading, when we had to rewind it so we could watch it. There's a knowledge and an experience gap there, and as every parent knows, at times it can be quite difficult to draw comparisons to help describe something, how it works or what it is to a small child. You have to draw comparisons, something that they know and understand to something that they don't. So, after about 15 minutes of discussing what a record player was, and finally getting to an answer that seemed to satisfy his curiosity, or maybe he was just tired of talking about it, we let it go. And I was able to kind of think about how much, things have changed in a relatively short amount of time when it comes to how we listen to and experience music. Even more so now, as this, we're sitting 10 years out from this conversation when this happened. It wasn't long ago that at least people of my generation were listening to their favorite band on a Sony Walkman portable tape player. We were reading music lyrics and liner notes from the cassette sleeve, all the while pondering the artwork that was used and why it was used to decorate the sleeve. We stored all of our cassettes and all of our records in old milk crates and shoe boxes for storage and transportation of our beloved music collection. We even loaned them out on occasion to help kind of create a mixtape, whether it was for friends or junior high crushes. Today, none of that remains, or at least in the mainstream. You can still buy cassettes. I looked it up. Good luck finding a cassette player. But we've gone through several iterations since then. Since I've been alive, we've gone from vinyl records to cassettes, cassettes to CDs, CDs to MP3s, of which I was extremely reluctant, and it's probably because I had so much money invested in CDs that I did not jump on the MP3 bandwagon for quite some time. It was a sore point in my life. And now MP3s to music streaming services. And we're at the point now where I haven't bought any music, whether it's digital or physical format, in over 10 years. And I have 2 large boxes of CDs sitting in my garage that I refuse to get rid of, with no real way to play it, except if I'm driving in my car. Things have changed quite a bit in just a few short years. And to be honest, it can be hard to keep up, to stay up to date with all the trends and the product innovations and new introductions. And I can start to see why my father became so frustrated when a new piece of technology came into our house. Now my boys can now start to see that same frustration in me as I try to experience video games with them, trying to remember what each of the 17 controller buttons do, as well as the exponential number of button combinations needed to simply get a character to do something, except move side to side. I got that one figured out. I'm accused of being a button masher, and I just merely call it survival. But as we know, these types of changes aren't necessarily limited to just the technology sector. Changes of the scale and magnitude, kind of permeate every aspect of our lives, and it happens whether we like it or not. Here's just a few examples. Personal privacy and free speech. Free speech definitely being something that's changed quite a bit over the past few years. healthcare and healthcare costs, immigration and border protection. We seem to be kind of bouncing back and forth on that. Gender expansion, transgenderism, even biological men participating in women's sports. Similar to changes in the world of technology, changes in how people live and interact with the world around them can bring one to their knees in confusion, in frustration, and even anger. It's, again, something that we are seeing play out in the world around us, in our country, but again, all around the world. The rate of change that we're seeing and the changes that are being made, they destabilize people. The very foundations of what we think to be true are seemingly changed at will. Isaiah 5, verse 20, playing out right before our eyes, which states, and that's Isaiah 5, verse 20, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, and who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." As humans, we need stability, something kind of unchanging in an ever-changing world, something that gives us structure and balance, some good old-fashioned boundaries or guardrails to live within. We can see this truth in action as we raise our children. You add structure and balance to the lives of a child who might be misbehaving or acting out, and in most situations, one will immediately begin to see behavioral changes and improvements almost instantly. But, what about adults? What about as humanity as a whole? It's, adding structure to the life of our own child is one thing, but, the whole of the world's population is something else. Well, thankfully, there is something that's stable in life, something that's universal, something multi-generational, something that sees no cultural or racial bounds, something that gives us hope and clarity of purpose, no matter what kind of changes we have to go through or experience in life. It's a constant, if you will. And that constant is God the Father and Jesus Christ. So for the next few minutes that we have, let's review some of the key unchanging aspects of God as listed in our Bibles and see how, those things can give us stability and hope in an ever-changing world. The title for today is God Never Changes, because that's God never changes. So if you would, please take your Bibles and turn to Malachi chapter 3. Malachi chapter 3. It's here we find one of the simplest and easy to understand statements that speaks to God's unchanging nature. It's Malachi 3, verse 6. This is, I'm just reading a part. It says, "For I am the Lord, I do not change." Again, that's Malachi 3, verse 6. I am the Lord, I do not change. It's simple, and it's honest, and it's straight to the point. I'm the Lord, I don't change. I don't think anyone could be any more clear than with a statement like this. Yet the world's population, many of who claim to be professing Christians, they read this and, well, maybe they don't read it, I don't know. But they say they believe it, but I'm not sure they truly understand the gravity of what God is saying here. This is an absolute statement coming directly from God. I do not change. My thoughts don't change. My words do not change. My laws do not change. Again, very plain, very simple, yet most of the world doesn't necessarily agree with this, as we can simply look at God's laws and statutes and see actions that don't kind of coincide with those. The Sabbath, for instance, defined within the Bible is the seventh day. It's Saturday, today. It's very clear, easy to understand. Reference scriptures, Genesis 2, verse 2, where God rested on the seventh day and he sanctified it. He set it aside. He declared it holy. Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11, and Deuteronomy 5, verses 12 through 15, where the Sabbath is listed out as the fourth commandment of 10, and it's to be observed. Leviticus 23, verse 3, where the Sabbath is listed with the 7 holy days. Again, it's very clear what God is instructing and what he wants us to do. Yet a majority of the Christian world sees Sunday as a Sabbath, or maybe they say, well, it's not the Sabbath, but it's the Lord's Day, changing worship to the first day of the week rather than God's instructed seventh day to kind of honor the resurrection of Jesus. But Jesus didn't ask us to do that, which, that isn't a whole another problem all in itself, and we won't be covering that today. But let's turn to Matthew chapter 5. It's the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. And, it's here that we find Christ defending or affirming Malachi 3, verse 6. This is Matthew 5, beginning in verse 17. We'll read verses 17 and 18. It says, "Do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For assuredly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law till all is fulfilled." As stated here, Christ didn't come to do away with the law. He didn't come to destroy it. He didn't come to nail it on the cross. Christ simply states that he came to fulfill it, to make it full. In other words, to help us understand the laws and the statutes as they were intended. God doing this not only by his words, but by his actions to help us understand them more clearly, and also giving us a model to follow. And what beautiful and much needed laws and statutes they are. They're summarized in Mark 12 into two categories: the love of God and the love of others. The commandments and the statutes founding the basis and structure for how we live our lives, defining how we should act and behave ourselves in a civilized manner, serving as a much needed foundation, again, in an ever-changing world of chaos. It's here that we see that God didn't change his mind about his guidelines to life and living. The world did, all under the influence of Satan. God's laws are still in effect, never changing from their inception. And lastly, let's turn to Leviticus chapter 23. Leviticus 23, it's a chapter in which God is introduces and describes the holy days to Moses, describing all that was to be done in their observance, the Sabbath, Passover, the days of unleavened bread, Pentecost, the Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, the Feast of Tabernacles, and the last great day. God's plan of salvation for all of humanity, neatly outlined in one chapter, all laid out before us to review, to observe, and to enjoy year after year. Now, I'd like to draw your attention to the latter half, or actually just verse 14 of Leviticus 23. Just after the Passover, the days of unleavened bread and the wave sheaf offering are described. And that's Leviticus 23. We'll be reading verse 14. "And you shall proclaim on the same day that it is a holy convocation to you. You shall do no customary work on it. It shall be a statute forever in all your dwellings throughout your generations." Then dropping down to verse 21 after describing Pentecost. "And you shall proclaim on the same day that it is a holy convocation to you. You shall do no customary work on it. It shall be a statute forever in all your dwellings throughout your generations." Now, if you notice, the ending of both of those verses are very similar, if not the same. It shall be a statute forever in all your dwellings throughout your generations. Forever is forever. It doesn't change. And this statement continues to show up throughout this chapter in verse 31 and again in verse 41. God wanted to make sure and make it very clear that we are to always observe these days, to keep them forever, to be reminded of them year after year, really to show us that he doesn't change his mind about things, and to give us hope and stability, again, in an ever-changing world. The Sabbath and the holy days serving as a reminder of where we've been, where we are, and what's waiting for us in the future, which, helps us to continue living God's way of life and ultimately becoming part of his family. Well, brethren, change is a constant in life, and there isn't anything that we can really do about it. We can't stop the next generation of music distribution or whatever that might be, or whatever whatever comes after music streaming services. And I can't bring back the Sony mini disc player, although they were a very convenient alternative to CDs. A lot smaller too. And I can show you what that is maybe some other time. We can't stop changes from happening in our lives or to our society. Change will come. It's inevitable. But there is a constant out there that we can hold on to. We have a God that does not change, a God who proclaims truth that will, again, not change, a God who gives us laws and principles to live by that won't drift over time, a way of life that brings peace and prosperity and stability, a God that promises a beautiful future that will be fulfilled. We have constants, God the Father and his Son, Jesus Christ, who will not change because God does not change. Good Sabbath.